Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
And I'm Rosie Murphy, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We have reached Season 3, Episode 19, The Brig. This is, as you know, a doozy of an episode.
So much happens. John and Sawyer walk together through the woods for a long time, and then ultimately John Locke forces Sawyer to be trapped in a room with Anthony Cooper, who of course at one time was Tom Sawyer.
We also have some more action between Richard Alpert and Locke this week, and we are going to be returning to our interview with Nestor Carbonell, who plays Richard Alpert.
It's a great delight. Let's get started.
On The Hatch, we start all of our episodes with our hottest takes about that week's segment of Lost. So, Rosie, what is your hot take about the Brig?
Oh my goodness. So there's a lot to say about this episode, so I'm just going to knock this out right at the beginning. Jack's trust in Juliet seems like it's getting a little ridiculous now. Is it not? I mean, so Kate comes to him with this very important information. He refuses to talk to her alone. He doesn't seem to care at all about the fact that he's lost leadership of this group. And I guess that's because he already, Juliet has already told him that the others have this plan and he's on the inside. But how does he not notice that there's sort of this crisis going on among his own people? And I don't know. It's just like a total 180 from Jack at the end of season 2, basically fighting to maintain power over the group, and now just saying I'll just sit back until it's time to act, and I trust that I have all the information, when of course he doesn't, and he gets very upset that no one told him about this woman in the tent.
Yeah, I do think, to defend Jack a little bit, I do think that the fact that Juliet has let him in, on the secret plan somewhat explains his trust in her. However, I think you're very right to identify that Jack has totally lost his grip on leadership of this group. And yes, he's making his own plans, and he and Rousseau have been talking already. As we haven't learned that yet, but Rousseau is out at the Black Rock gathering dynamite for him. And, it's like he has a plan, but he's just he's lost all semblance of connection with reality here with the people he's supposed to be leading, I think. And, I mean, Desmond doesn't trust him, and Saeed doesn't trust him, and Kate very, very grudgingly finally tells him that there's a woman in a tent who parachuted onto the island. The fact that this has all been allowed to happen under Jack's nose speaks poorly to Jack's leadership at the moment, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, there's been no vote. No one put Jack in charge. He's allowed to sort of step away from this responsibility, but it just surprises me that he does. And he doesn't really, because he's still plotting this whole other thing.
He seems to think that he's still, providing leadership, but really he's not. He's doing something, but it's not that.
Right, and he was so obsessed with that for so long that this is something else.
Right, I mean, if we can't live together, we're going to die alone. Sorry.
Anyway,
yeah.
That's all. Sammy, what's your hot take?
Yeah, so just to bring us into the Sawyer Anthony Cooper realm of things, I feel like I've said this before, but I really got to highlight it. I just think the actor who plays Anthony Cooper, whose name is Kevin Teague, I just think he does such a magnificent job of portraying this character, here and elsewhere.
Oh yeah.
There's just something about him. He's just oozing this kind of sludge of charisma and sleaziness all at the same time.
Sludge of charisma is quite a phrase.
I think it works. Charisma and sleaziness, though. I mean, he just some of his line readings, though, when he's in there in the brig with Sawyer, and Sawyer says, we didn't, telling him we didn't die, we crashed here on the island. And he says,
You sure it's an island?
Well, what else is it?
Little hot for heaven, isn't it?
And the whole, if this ain't hell, friend, where are we? There's just something about the way he says that stuff that just that kind of makes my skin crawl and puts me on edge. It's just totally wonderful. I mean, he awful guy who deserves to die in this episode. But I love watching him on screen.
And I think we've talked about this before. If we were to make a spectrum of sort of most purely good at one end, most complex in the middle, and most purely evil at the other, I think he would be pretty near pure evil. I'm not sure if there's anybody worse.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably make a case for, like, Martin Keamy, but Keamy's a hired gun. I mean, he's doing it for the money, which, that's not that that's
Cooper
good.
almost does this for fun.
Right, well, he does. I mean, this is how Anthony Cooper has chosen to, make a living, and he, and it's very personal. He destroys people's lives and feels no shame.
Oh, gosh.
But he's fun to watch.
Oh my goodness, I can't wait to talk about him. Real quick, before we move away from Martin Keamy, many thanks. We had a kind listener message us and point out that, a couple weeks ago we wondered whether Charles Widmore had ever had anyone killed. Quote, that could be a reasonable assumption if it weren't for that little mercenary team thing.
Ah, yes.
That's a great call. That comes to us from Simon Lesniak. I totally apologize if I have butchered the pronunciation of your name. Thank you so much for that very obvious correction. Of course, you're right.
Yes.
But anyway.
This, I mean, I don't know where you want to start. I guess to me, the thing about this episode that starts it off is just that it's such a brilliant structure of this episode, like in terms of just the way it unfolds, where, first we learn that Locke wants to bring Sawyer into the jungle. He claims to have been there. As this is happening, the flashbacks unroll, and we realize maybe there's more than, more than meets the eye with what Locke's story is. And then we get them together in the room, and then, finally we get the revelation of who Anthony Cooper is, and it's building to this the whole time. Not that fans hadn't, guessed at this point in the show that Locke's dad was the guy who destroyed Sawyer's life. Like, that was pretty well established. But just the way it builds up to that, and you finally realize what's going on, what's going to happen here, it's a spellbinding story that unfolds.
Well, yeah, it is. And we almost realize it alongside Sawyer, which I think is fun. Like, Sawyer realizing who Cooper is a really stunning moment. I mean, he...
Oh, yeah.
Does that little double take and says, Tom Sawyer.
How about that? How about what? Sawyer's my name, too.
I'm speechless. I have nothing more to say.
No, it's gripping, and we're getting towards, the outcome here, but like the way the direction and the editing and the acting and the writing and the scene where Sawyer, ultimately loses his temper and kills Cooper, where, first he has him read the letter, and Cooper's just, like, the whole, her name was Mary thing, and he responds, blah, 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 and that's going to be the moment.
Yeah, well, and Sawyer is, like, really emotional for this whole episode, in a way that kind of surprises me. Like, when he and John are walking through the jungle, he sort of confronts John and says, like, why are you making me do this? Why won't you just do it yourself?
Yeah.
And it's right after Locke brings up Sawyer's parents and his history and starts asking him about that stuff, and Sawyer, like, tackles him to the ground and holds a knife to his throat. And if Locke is trying to sort of, whatever the sort of can you kill this person version of buttering someone up is, I mean, if he's trying to sort of talk Sawyer into it, he's doing a really good job. Just sort of dropping these little reminders of Sawyer's personal history.
Absolutely. And I think, for what it's worth, I mean, good for Sawyer for realizing that something is not quite right here.
Yeah. Something's weird.
Mean, yeah, and watching the episode in hindsight and knowing what's really going on, like, yeah, I see it as well, like Locke's story that I kidnapped Ben and I need you to come kill him. Like, that doesn't really hold up to a ton of scrutiny, so I think Sawyer picks up on that pretty quick.
No, something that's fascinating here is that John seems to have learned a few tricks from Ben in convincing Sawyer to do this. Let me play this out. Like, when John first walks up to Sawyer, like in the middle of the night when he's peeing, and tries to convince him to come with him, Sawyer initially refuses, and John just sort of shrugs and says, well, guess I'll go find somebody else. And Sawyer's like, oh, no, wait, I'll come. And just that little hint of, oh, well, maybe you're not the guy. Maybe you can't do this. I'll go get somebody else is enough.
Oh, God, that does sound like
to
Ben.
make him come. And, well, yeah, and then Ben does it to John, and, you know, in the flashbacks when he's trying to tell him that he needs to kill Cooper and John can't, and yeah, they're all just manipulating one another's emotions. And
what I think is especially interesting in how Sawyer reacts to that is his insistence that he's not going to kill Ben, that they're going to take him, you know, back to camp and basically take him prisoner. And I thought that was such an interesting marker that the show is putting down about where Sawyer is at right now. I think it felt to me like the writers telling us, like, oh, okay, like, Sawyer has actually, like, changed on the island and is now a person who is not just going to commit cold-blooded murder as an act of revenge. Like, you know, he's trying to have a principle here. That's how I read it. I don't know if that's how you read it.
I read it more as, like, skepticism. Like, yeah, you know, he kept Sawyer in a cage for some amount of days and tricked him into the pacemaker thing, which was pretty fucked up, but I don't know, all of that just didn't seem like enough to me. Like, because Sawyer is not a mercenary. Like, he's not just somebody who, I mean, when he was working himself up to kill that man in Australia, who of course turned out to not be Anthony Cooper, I mean, that was a whole thing. And
right, he went out and got drunk with Christian Shepherd first.
Yeah, before he could sort of work himself up to do it. Like, I don't think he was ever just going to walk into the jungle and shoot this guy. Yeah, I don't know. You might be right in terms of they're trying to show us some growth on Sawyer's part, but I don't really think there's any growth here. I think he would have done the same thing on day one.
That's a good point. That's interesting. Well, I guess it's interesting then that Locke's expectation is that if he tells him, I have Ben locked up in the jungle, I want you to come kill him, that Sawyer would just do it. I guess...
Yeah.
Locke just has a different read on Sawyer.
Or, I mean, it was always an excuse anyway. Like, all he had to get him to do was come into the jungle. And I guess, you know, you're going to have to kill somebody at least is close enough to the truth. Maybe John's worried that he's not a good liar or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
But
we had a listener who actually called us about this issue of Sawyer and the act of murder and how it affects him. Maybe we should play that.
Hi, my hot take for the Brig is about Sawyer and how surprised I was at his ability to handle the enormity of confronting and killing Cooper without it destroying him. The first time I watched this episode and the ones that follow it, I really thought, strangling a defenseless man might send Sawyer down a dark spiral. But after killing Cooper, we don't really see Sawyer exhibit any of the antisocial or self-hating behavior we saw from him on the island in the first season after he murdered the shrimp guy in Sydney. I don't want to say that killing Cooper didn't weigh on him. He throws up, and I think Kate mentions in the finale that he's been a little distant after his adventures with Locke. But all in all, considering the enormity of the situation and, from my point of view, its moral ambiguity, he handles it more steadily than I expected. But I still can't figure out whether Sawyer's path to peace and happiness, which has its pinnacle in the LaFleur episode of Season 5, happens because he strangles Cooper or despite it. I don't think the show ever really lets us know, but my best guess is killing Cooper wasn't as satisfying or cathartic as Sawyer had built it up over his entire life. But now that he's done it, he knows that it doesn't really fill the void in his heart, and he's actually able to, in some way, because of that, move forward and try to find something that does. Anyway, that's my hot take. Enjoy the show. Thanks. Bye.
So this is, I think, a really, really interesting and nuanced read on this. So fundamentally, the idea here is that killing Tom Sawyer was not as cathartic as James Sawyer had hoped. And so now he realizes, like, well, you know, I thought that was the thing that was going to make me happy or sort of make me feel at peace after this thing I've been carrying around my entire life. And it doesn't bring him any peace. And maybe that's the thing that finally lets him know, like, okay, it's time to move on. And it's time to, maybe that's the thing that makes him into the sort of person who can jump out of the helicopter to save the rest of the group and who can eventually be like a genuinely good partner to Juliet. And like, maybe this is the thing that, you know, it doesn't put it to rest, but it does put it to rest.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting idea that I hadn't considered, and I would tweak slightly the question that the our caller asked. I sort of read it that he's asking the question, is Sawyer only able to move forward because he does those things, or does he move forward because of this murder, or does he move forward despite having committed this murderous act? And I would say it's the flip is between moving forward because of it, or is moving forward incidental to it. Because I don't think we have any real reason to think that this is going to affect him in a negative way. I mean, I know you made the point that Sawyer is not a murderer, and that's a good point. And the one time he did it, it was the wrong guy, and he had to work himself up to it. But I also think that the act of killing Anthony Cooper is something that he's been building up towards for a very long time. That he's very ultimately comfortable with the idea of it.
Right. Well, it's kind of all he's thought about for decades.
Right. I just, I never thought that this was going to be something that was he was going to feel like loads of regret for. So I'm not surprised that he's able to move on with his life, and not be, weighed down by knowing what he has done. But I had not considered the possibility that really, sort of like what Ben is saying with Locke this episode, making the claim that Locke needs to do this to move forward himself. Maybe that, even if that isn't the case for Locke, maybe it is the case for Sawyer.
Yeah, well, and in the end of the day, they're one and the same, right? Like, he does this, and then he moves forward. And, because of, in spite of, in addition to, doesn't matter that much, but of course, why would we have a podcast if we weren't going to parse the fine details of these things?
Well, no, I think it's more than semantic. I think, and this is the I think why it's a really interesting question that our listener is asking. It's just, would he not have been able to move forward with his life if he hadn't done this, or would he have been able to regardless, and would he have just been able to let this go? I don't know.
I don't think he would have been able to let it go. I think there's something really symbolic in Cooper tearing up the letter.
Yeah.
He continued to carry that around after the murder in Australia, after everything he's been through on this island. And Cooper takes it from him and refuses to finish reading it and tears it up, which is kind of the final insult. But then he doesn't have it anymore. And I think it's a handy, symbol of he's not sort of carrying that grudge anymore.
Well, here's an interesting question, and I think that's a really astute observation about the letter. It seems to be the act of Cooper, doing the, ripping it into pieces that finally puts Sawyer over the edge. Do you think there's any possibility that if Cooper hadn't done that, or had, shown any amount of contrition at all, instead of, just kind of shamelessly ripping up the thing, that Sawyer wouldn't have killed him? Or do you think that was the inevitable outcome of this interaction?
I don't know. I have no idea. I'd not considered that.
I kind of think he would have done it still.
Yeah.
I kind of think your point about the fact that he's still carrying this letter with him and is able to produce it, immediately when he realizes what's going on, it probably speaks to just like how unable Sawyer was going to be to resist the ability to do this.
Yeah.
And his inability to move forward in life. I think our listener had a good point. I think that the more I think about it, the more convinced I am that this really is a moment that's actually critical for Sawyer to move forward with, which I'm not so comfortable with because it's an act of murder, but like,
right.
It does seem to be what Sawyer needs in his life. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and Cooper makes it easier by being just the worst. I think. I mean, it makes it feels pretty justified.
I mean, one thing we haven't really discussed is just, it actually is kind of interesting that Locke can't do it.
Yeah. Huh.
On the one hand, yes, it's his father, and on the other, and maybe what he did to Locke wasn't quite as bad as what Anthony Cooper did, in terms of getting Sawyer's parents killed. But on the other hand, the fact that it's his dad, it's so much more personal. It's got him in a wheelchair, and it's like, Locke, it's not that Locke doesn't have the fuel to do it, or the reason to, it just, I don't know, does he not have that act in him of committing a murder that Sawyer does, or is it because he still feels some, residual affection for his father, or is there some other reason? It's interesting.
Yeah, I think Locke and Sawyer have dramatically different relationships to this man, right? Like, Sawyer fundamentally doesn't know him. He's just sort of built up this specter in his mind of what this is. And it's been, like, getting revenge on killing this man has been his mission for a number of years. And he doesn't know him. He doesn't have any good memories with him. He has one horrific memory. Whereas, right. Locke's, got a lot going on. Especially as it relates to his parentage. And I feel like Locke, some part of him, even after the accident, still wanted that to have not been true. And, I think the fact that Locke helps out Cooper with that thing where he goes and gets that money and takes it to the motel, and it's after the kidney.
Yeah, you're totally right.
And he's still willing to help him despite knowing that Cooper fucked him over, because he still sort of craves that approval. So I think the fact is that Locke has a relationship with this man, and I think he knows that he will always look to this man as the father who never loved him, and X, Y, and Z, and he just isn't going to be able to kill him.
Well, I really had completely forgotten this storyline where Locke is still kind of chasing that dream, or at least seems like he can't quite let go of that idea of a relationship with his father. It's that is very telling with what we see here, even though he knows that's gone. And I think another point to bring in here, because I was thinking about, is Locke just unable to commit an act of murder? We do see him in the finale of this season, in just a couple episodes, throw a knife through Naomi's back, in a very clear attempt to kill her, which does not, she stays alive for a while afterwards, as we learn in the beginning of season 4, but he doesn't seem to have any hesitation when he feels like, the security and safety of the island is at stake.
And we know, Locke is all about his mission, his purpose, and he's willing to do shocking things in defense of his mission and his purpose, but not really in defense of his person and his sort of personal grudges.
So I think this is a good moment to then transition into the abject cruelty and shittiness and lies of Ben this week, because I wasn't sure how to phrase that. So abject cruelty and shittiness.
Abject shittiness is pretty good.
No, but Ben frames this as this is something that critical that Locke needs to do in order to move forward as as a leader of the island, and as a special person within the others, that he needs to as Kylo Ren would say, confront the past, kill it if you must. I think I'm getting that quote right. But and Locke doesn't see it that way. He thinks this is not necessary for him to do this. But my God, Ben is just like, Ben makes it sound like this is something, and use another quote, a sacrifice that the island demands. But no, this is not the island demanding a sacrifice. This is Ben fucking around with Locke and setting him up for failure intentionally to preserve his own leadership role within the others.
This is some weird test that Ben has gone to great lengths to devise, including seemingly like sending people to the mainland and like kidnapping Cooper and bringing him forcibly to the island. And he basically does it to humiliate John and to embarrass him in front of everyone else, because Ben is insecure and worried about losing his leadership role.
Right, he's threatened by Locke. And I think that wasn't at all clear to me when I originally watched this. I mean, I think, you knew that was the result of it, but what was really striking to me watching it, with the hindsight, is when Ben talks about the magic box, and the magic box, producing Anthony Cooper because he was of importance to Locke. it's a crock of shit. He's making the whole thing up.
Yeah.
Like I remember, so much everyone trying to figure out what was in the magic box. Ben invented the magic box. You're right. Ben went and he brought Anthony Cooper there specifically for the purpose of setting Locke up for failure, and is couching it in this important task that the island has for Locke, and it's all self-serving.
Well, and then he goes to that whole trouble of like dragging Cooper along with the crowd and basically stringing him up in front of the crowd and trying to get Locke to kill him in public, which is a whole different level of fucked up. And then he stands up and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, he's not who we thought he was." Yeah,
which is the outcome that Ben wants.
Yep.
And tell me if you think I'm wrong here. I was kind of wondering, maybe this is a scenario where Ben knows he wins either way. Like,
yeah,
I was because I'm sitting there, watching the others come out of their tents. And, Cindy with the two little kids as well, watching this, horrific scene where Locke is supposed to, I guess, slit the guy's throat with a giant knife. And I'm thinking, do they really want to see, Locke slash his dad's throat? And I'm thinking maybe Ben wins either way. Maybe if Locke doesn't do it, he's able to declare to his people with some level of credibility, he's not the man we thought he was, he can't do this important thing. And if Locke actually does it and goes through with it, maybe everyone is so disturbed by seeing Locke do that he's diminished in their eyes for that reason.
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah,
Ben only plays 12-dimensional chess. Sorry,
11 is too few.
Yes.
No, you're entirely right. I had not considered that outcome. I was thinking more of if Locke did do it, it would be Ben's way of sort of reasserting his dominance. So in saying, like, I make the rules, I create the tests, and you pass the tests. I am the teacher, and you are the student. And if you are passing the tests, then you are only, you're following the path that I set out for you, but don't you forget that I set it out for you.
That's really interesting, too. I like that interpretation.
Another option here, too.
Right. And probably at the end of the day, Ben... Right. And probably he thinks that Locke is not going to do it, I guess. And he's right. But it's... Yeah, there's got to be a way that Ben sees himself coming out of this ahead, no matter what happens.
Yeah, I think you're right in that he doesn't really expect Locke to do it. But then Locke does. And he follows his instructions to the letter and carries his father's body on his back to camp. And then Ben figures that out next week. But
yeah, to me, Ben views Locke, entirely through the prism of threat and insecurity. Because Ben, for all of his claims about caring about the island and protecting the island and the mysticism of it, like, I think by the end of the show, when, Ben is willing to go down with the ship rather than leave, I think by that point he has perhaps developed a real relationship with the island. But I also kind of think at this point the island is only special to Ben in that it is a place where he can be in charge and, not have to be beholden to someone like his father.
I agree 100%.
I think that's what the island represents to Ben right now, and Locke threatens that paradigm, and that's how he sees Locke.
Yeah, because Locke does have a real relationship with the island, whatever that might mean, and maybe this is the first time Ben has ever seen that for real. And he's sort of undergoing a weeks-long, oh shit, how are people going to react when they see what I'm saying I have, he really has, and, I didn't think that was ever going to happen.
I think a weeks-long oh shit moment. I mean, he didn't just pull Anthony Cooper in yesterday, right? Like the submarine blew up like a week ago. He had to have this planned out for a while, like well before Locke walked into his camp.
Right.
Like he was prepping for this moment of undercutting Locke when it came to it.
Which is so wild. Oh.
Yeah. And something I'd really, really not thought about before, like this rewatch.
Yeah. Oh dear.
Hey, it's something. there was all that other stuff that happened at the beach with Naomi, which we've barely talked about.
Oh, yeah. She lays out, a tiny bit more detail about the plane that was found, which doesn't lessen the mystery at all.
No, it intensifies it.
And between, last week, her saying that they found the plane, they were all dead, and this week Anthony Cooper saying we're in hell, we're really building some more momentum for... I see why, at this point in watching the show, there was sort of a drumbeat building around they're dead or this is purgatory or something. They're really, they are talking about that possibility.
Yeah, I see it as well. I mean, and Anthony Cooper has the same story as Naomi, which is that everyone died in the crash. Mm-hmm. And, still, if that's the case, raises the question of how did Naomi and Anthony Cooper also end up in hell with them?
Right.
But I did enjoy when Saeed questions her story. Good, and by the way, fucking good for Saeed for bringing skepticism to everything all the time.
VIP, everyone on this island would be dead if it weren't for Saeed. Anyway,
that should be in our Twitter bio. Everyone on this island would be dead if it weren't for Saeed. But no, just when she's questioning her story and the fact, did you really have a way to communicate with the people on the freighter? Mm. And she puts out the radio and says,
"Remind me not to rescue you, Saeed."
Oh boy, it's good. It's real good. This is such a good episode.
Glad somebody had the foresight to go get Saeed.
Right. Well, that was what was so interesting. Desmond didn't trust Jack. Desmond, by the way, who, our newest beach camp survivor, still forming the leader of this little group of Hurley and Charlie and Jin. Desmond takes charge. Desmond insists they don't talk to Jack. Desmond, clearly sends Hurley to go get Saeed. And there's that great moment when Saeed comes into the tent and he and Desmond kind of look at each other and Desmond smiles and nods. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're in this with us. We're in this together.
Welcome to this weird club we've got going on.
This weird club that Jack is not a part of. Did we miss anything? Do you have any hindsights?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I have any additional. Did you save one? Sometimes you save a zinger.
I actually managed to save 2 hindsights.
Oh goodness, here we go.
I'm sorry, I'm just full of ideas this week. First one, when Richard tells, Locke, we know you're very special, my mind immediately started flashing through all of the scenes where Richard, visits Locke at various points in his young life and comes away with the conclusion that he is not, in fact, special.
Yeah.
And of course that was all set in motion by Locke going back in time and telling Richard, go find me when I'm born because I'm special. And then... Anyway, Richard is now finally convinced of it. So I thought back to the flashes of season 5. And season 4, actually, Cabin Fever. And we also get our first allusion to the temple this week. Not by name, but when Ben says to Locke, we're going somewhere new, actually somewhere very old, we know now he is referring to the temple, and... That is the one time in this episode when I frowned a little because it made me think of all of the not-so-exciting stuff that occurs in the temples.
Temple action to come.
Temple action to come. Indeed.
Oh, dear.
So, hindsight. 2020.
Anyway, well, speaking of Richard...
Yeah, we've got Nestor.
So, yeah, we are returning to Sammy's interview with Nestor Carbonell, who played Richard Alpert. Seemingly the kindest man on earth. This is just a joy to listen to.
I agree. He's the nicest.
He has dogs. We'll hear the dogs briefly. A dog?
One dog. A dog.
One dog. We will hear the dog briefly. Anyway, let's play it.
So I want to ask about the relationship between Richard and Ben, which is, I think, the first real relationship we get to see with Richard on the show, where, he's clearly reporting to Ben.
Yeah.
He also seems to have his own agenda. I mean, I'm struck by the scene with Richard and Locke near the end of the 3rd season, where you kind of go around Ben's back and deliver to Locke this answer, hey, he wants you to kill your father, you can't do it, here's someone else who can. I think that, I think Ben's trying to throw you off here. What do you make of Richard's loyalty or lack thereof to Ben?
Yeah, it's interesting, and again, we were learning this, episode by episode. So we weren't given sort of the broad, the end game in any fashion. So we had to go pretty much moment to moment, which is a great exercise for an actor, is really to trust in the words that you're given and trust in your director to guide you emotionally. But so I didn't know where it was heading, but certainly I could glean from this that you're right, that Richard is kind of a consigliere to Ben. But yes, he did have his own agenda. And so I had to believe this guy is reporting to someone even bigger than Ben. And there was talk of Jacob and this Jacob character. And I go, okay, well, there's some other entity here that we're both beholden to, So I knew on the one hand that I had some allegiance to Ben, but yeah, this guy sort of had ulterior motives and he always talked about a purpose, a higher purpose. So I knew that there was something either mythical or religious that this guy was beholden to, but I didn't know what.
So they didn't tell you anything?
We knew nothing. We knew some general ideas, and it was so funny as actors we got to the point because the directors knew, and again these were episodic directors mostly, except for Jack Bender.
I'm sure Jack knew some stuff.
Jack knew, I'm sure, everything.
Yeah,
he had to, and Stephen Williams probably as well. But the other directors, many of whom would direct multiple episodes, knew quite a bit, but I don't know that they knew certainly not as much as Jack and Stephen, and so they were, so we had to couch our questions, to them something like, would it be wrong for me to assume so and so? A lot of those questions, as opposed to, can you tell me why I'm saying this? So it was a lot of it was, and what was cool about it is that it forced us to write our own history. And I know a lot of the time I was just dead wrong. Episode to episode, I go, oh, wow, so that's completely wrong. But at least you take a shot emotionally, and you invest emotionally in something, and it's grounded in something, whether it's real or not. And so in that way, it was cool. And then there was one particular episode. There was I'm jumping ahead now.
That's okay.
Is when Locke comes back, and.
When he comes back, I'm doing air quotes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When he comes back and he essentially exactly.
Yeah.
And he says to me, "It's good to see you out of those chains."
Yes.
So in that, I remember not knowing what he was talking about, and that's where the director, guided me and basically said to me, you're skeptical. You're very, very wary of why he's here, of how he's here. And I had no idea what the director was talking about, but I just had to trust in the director.
Was that Jack or was that Stephen? Do you remember?
I can't remember who. It wasn't. I don't think it was either one of them. It wasn't either one of them. I know I was. That was the episode where I was working on this on the Black Rock in the boat.
Yeah. They revealed that later.
They revealed later. Yeah. But yeah, that I can't remember right now. I don't think it was either one of them.
So I'm curious, what kind of histories had you written for Richard up to that point? What was in your head?
Well, immediately, one of the first things I was like, how do I account for the fact that this guy hasn't aged, from the 50s, and the 50s flashback with Locke as a kid.
Right. And I think it's the 70s where we first see you in flashback. And
yes.
You've got long hair, so it's a little ambiguous, but it seems pretty clear that you're the same.
Exactly, yeah. So that was interesting because that was my first sort of window into this guy hasn't aged. And I remember Bobby Roth did direct that episode. That was the one in the 70s one where where I meet young Ben.
Yeah.
I essentially meet young Ben, and that was sort of that was eye opening. I was like, oh, okay. So now, because obviously the Juliet flashback was a contemporary one, but this one I was like, how do I make this leap, and how is this guy somehow supernatural, and how did he come to be this way, So I can't remember what I wrote. I can't remember but at that point I was like, well, I'm immortal. I don't know if I've always been immortal, but I'm immortal, and I have a higher purpose, and I had to go. I guess. I was raised Roman Catholic, so we don't have that in Catholicism. Right. But I had to sort of endow with this guy with some kind of saintly properties, but I don't remember specifically what I wrote. I just remember being more specific as to just sort of accepting that and having to sort of take that enormous leap. And then I was more specific as to, okay, why how do I justify killing all of these people?
I was definitely going to ask about that because you talk about everyone as a shade of gray on Lost.
Yeah.
That act is one of the most heinous acts, I think, in the whole show. Maybe the worst. I mean, it's genocide.
It's genocide. There's no getting around it.
So what was your thinking about that?
Exactly. How do I justify genocide? How do I justify, doing something there's nothing more horrific than this. So how does any actor justify this? And at that point, I had to. So sorry, my dog
That's okay.
gets very excited.
For our listeners, this is Nestor.
This is Richard Alpert's dog.
This is Nestor's dog, Donna, who's here on the couch with us in the living room, yapping a little bit. And she's very adorable, so don't mind her at all.
Yeah, she's making sure Ben doesn't show up or anything. But no, I think that was a brutal one as an actor. So how do you justify this? I don't remember exactly how I did it, but I just had to. I know I had to believe that there was something bigger than all of this, and either I had to again endow some of these people with having committed horrific crimes themselves or whatever it was, but I had to there was a higher purpose. This is a sacrifice that had to be made for some cause. I can't remember what that was, but that's as big a leap as anyone can make. How do you justify that? Because you can't. So. And I think a lot of it ends up being accepting that this is, as a character, that this is something you don't want to do, but you have to do.
Within the character.
Within the character.
Okay.
This is something as a character. I know I don't want to do this. I know I don't want to do it, but unfortunately, I have to do it because if I don't do it, something worse happens.
Right. Because the cause demands it.
It's exactly right. It's the most horrific thing. So it's only interesting if it pains. If you see the internal conflict, or at least if you feel the actor feeling that internal conflict, and hopefully I felt it, and hopefully people felt that.
Well, I think it comes through in the moment where, and this is in the writing as well, but in the way you play it, when your character says to Michael Emerson's character, Ben, do you want us to go get your father's body? It seems to me that there's some contrition in Richard in that moment, and of course Ben, who's more evil in some ways than some of the other characters, and leave him out there. Right. Which is an interesting contrast.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that, yeah. And again, he has justifications for doing what he has to do it, and as an actor and as a character. But yeah, I think that's one of the amazing things. Again, it all starts with the writing. And the writing, Damon Lindelof's and Carlton Cuse's writing and the entire writing staff was so layered and so deep and profound and so, that I mean, for us, we had to show up. Yes, we had to do our homework. Yes, of course, we had to work and emotionally, do all of that. But when you start with what's this profound writing that is layered and it is complicated and it is contradictory in the best possible way because people are contradictory. We're not just playing. We're having to play a lot of subtext, which is the greatest gift you can give to an actor. So yeah, those moments are great.
I certainly don't want to ask you to say anything negative about other shows or projects that you've worked on, but how does Lost compare in that way to other stuff you've done? I mean, have you worked on other projects with that kind of ability to play so deep and really read into stuff, or is Lost unique in that way?
Well, certainly Lost for me was. And definitely on network television, it was such a departure from anything I'd ever gotten to play. And I say this being completely grateful for every job I've done, because as an actor, to get to work and get to do this, and get paid to do it, first of all, just to get to do it is phenomenal. But to be able to make a living out of it is a gift. So I am eternally grateful for every job I've had the opportunity to do. And with Lost, it was for me the first time I'd gotten to play on this level since theater. In theater you do get to do.
I didn't know you had a theater background.
I started in theater. I started in college in theater and also New York. And you're getting to do phenomenal writing. In theater typically. And this felt like that. It's like, oh my God, now I'm getting to do subtext in a meaningful way on television, which, because of the constraints of TV, you don't often get to do. One of the things that Carlton told me when we had lunch later on, when I got to know him a little bit better through the course of shooting, is like, Lost for us was a great vehicle to do character work. It was. Those episodes were designed to basically, those flashback episodes in particular, were designed for us to. It was a great, not excuse, but it was a great vehicle for us to really do character work, character-driven drama. which you don't always get on network TV. More so now than you ever did. And especially now with the advent of cable and streamers, you get into you have more than 42 minutes to play with.
But this 15 years ago, before streaming, before cable had exploded in the way it had, this was unique.
This was really unique to get to do this kind of character work, in such a deep and profound way. So now since then I've had, because I think Lost and Sopranos again was hugely instrumental in breaking out, cable TV and, at that time. And it was right around that time they were filming as well. Things started to change, especially with The Sopranos, with cable. And since then, I got to work with Carlton again and with Carrie Aaron on Bates Motel. And that,
Right. I'd forgotten you were on that. I'm sorry, I haven't seen Bates Motel.
Sure, no worries. But that was another... That again was another place where I got to sort of play subtext and really with Carrie Aaron's phenomenal and Carlton's phenomenal writing, it allowed for me to again work that muscle in that way. You
referred to this earlier, but I mean the way Lost changed network television. Could you expand on that just a little bit? I'm always curious for people within the industry how they see this show as having played that role. Yeah, again, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to let Dawn out just for a second here. That's okay.
Here's the girl.
She's gotten sick of us, hasn't she?
She has, or she thinks the others are out there. I don't know. I'm sorry. You're asking how?
I just was hoping you could expand a little bit on this idea that Lost was transformative and what it was about that.
I think the interesting thing about how I feel, and again, I don't want to overstate it, but how I do feel that Lost had an impact, on the ways, particularly with network television, was structured and what it explored is it. First of all, explored time in a way that I hadn't, I think, with the flashbacks episodes, and then flash forward episodes, and then the flash sideways episodes. So the notion of exploring time in that way, I mean, there have been shows that have done that, but not.
It was a central feature of the show.
It truly was a central feature of the show, and that combined with the fact that certainly early on, those episodes were essentially devoted to characters, developing characters. So they're almost standalone episodes in a way. Where you're devoting an entire episode to finding out how this person came to be, who they are, and on the island. So that element as well. And I think thematically, what I found interesting is that Damon and Carlton tried to sort of separate each season thematically. Like one season represented redemption, one was they all had sort of some theme attached to them. And I'd never seen. I mean, I'm sure maybe other writers had come up, I'd sort of ascribed sort of themes to entire seasons, but I'd never known of that.
That's interesting. I've actually never thought about it that way. I mean, the seasons seem internally consistent. I just never tried to put labels on them in quite that way.
I think when I was talking to Damon, that they were looking at the seasons in that way. Like, okay, so this is the moment of redemption. This is a moment of vengeance, or this is they all sort of represented elements. Some elements, some theme. But and then exploring all of these incredible things. I mean, to explore mythology, religion, philosophy, on network television, in such a profound way. And I mean, characters that are based on, John Locke, or, my character, Richard Alpert, is a professor.
I was going to bring that up. Ram Dass, right?
Yes, Ram Dass, yes.
I'm so curious. Did you ever do any research or looking into what he's all about?
A little bit, that he's a professor, and, I read about the LSD. And,
yes. That's about as far as I got when reading into him as well. Okay,
exactly.
Hallucinogenics.
But I don't know much about him. I quickly learned that this is not the character. Right. I think, and certainly, I think Damon or Carlton, I can't remember who had, or maybe both of them had spoken to them, and I think he was sort of charmed by the fact that one of the characters are named after him. But no, this is not the man.
That's okay.
Make no mistake. But so I just love that they had these internal references, within themselves, about some of these characters. But no, I don't. I didn't ground my character.
That's okay. I looked him up the other day just because I was thinking. I wonder if I was so surprised. Not only is he still alive, he's on Twitter.
Yeah,
I figured he was like this, hundreds of years ago mystic. No, he's out there on Twitter.
I've got to reach out to him. I got to start following because that's the only one I'm on. I'm not on anything else but Twitter. I've got to reach out to Richard Alpert.
I wanted to verify this, and Ram Dass, aka Richard Alpert, really is on Twitter and seemingly pretty active.
I did not make that up.
Oh my goodness. What a strange time we live in.
It is. I mean, there was so much Nestor said that was fascinating to me. I loved the idea that, that when I asked him what was groundbreaking about Lost, that his first response was how time featured so significantly in the show.
Yeah.
Which is not the thing that usually people talk about when they talk about Lost breaking ground on network television. They talk about the diversity of the cast and the long-running mysteries.
And when they do talk about the time, it's often kind of like, well, and then they started time traveling, and boy, I don't know.
Right, and it's and he just framed it as this fundamental feature of the show that was unique. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I hadn't really put together, even though now that he said it this way, it seems obvious, is that even before you get to the flash forwards of season 4 and the flash sideways of season 6, that the flashbacks themselves of the first 3 years, that is something that really set the stage for flashing through time in a different direction. That it wasn't just that they tricked you and now they're doing flash forwards instead of flashbacks. It's that element of time and moving through it was actually a feature of the first 3 seasons as well. And you were just doing it in a more conventional direction in those seasons, and then later it was unconventional.
The thesis of that was sort of, well, the past influences what we're doing now, which no one would disagree with. But then the flash forwards become, well, what we're doing now influences the future, which is the logical next step, but just not one that we're used to taking in this medium.
Yeah, that's totally it. And seeing how the present affects the future, in real time rather than sequentially.
I'm so excited.
So I really appreciated that insight that he had into what was special about this show.
Yeah. Had you ever heard before this notion that each season had a theme?
I had not, and I was kind of hoping that you would bring that up and explain that to me, because that
was new to me.
Yeah, I have trouble with that one. Maybe it's there at a deep level. I would be hard pressed to assign, a theme to each of these seasons that's not a plot theme.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to keep thinking on that. If you have any suggestions out there,
well, we're watching season 3. What's the theme of season 3? Call us and tell us. Actually, no. We do have a phone number. You heard us play a voice message earlier. 9546 Dharma. Again, that's a +1 9546 Dharma. You could also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/thehatchpodcast and send us a voice message. Would be real curious to hear, what you think the theme of this season of Lost is, or any other thoughts you have about the show.
Next week we will be watching Man Behind the Curtain. Excitingly, we recently received a message from the man who directed that episode, who is going to join us to discuss it next week.
Yeah, that's Bobby Roth, who you may have heard Nestor mention briefly in this week's interview. So we'll return to Nestor for the final 2 weeks of the season, but be chatting with Bobby about Ben and the Man Behind the Curtain next week.
Oh, and there will be so much to chat about. As Sammy said, if you'd like to call and leave us a hot take or any audio thoughts, we are at 9546 Dharma. We are also at facebook.com/thehatchpodcast and on Twitter at thehatchpodcast.
Please rate us on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, I should say, or Stitcher or Spotify or YouTube or wherever you listen to The Hatch. We very much appreciate your letting us know what you think of the show.
We do. Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Roth.
And we will be back next week.
Namaste.